So, good morning. As we allow people to filter in, I will do my initial introduction because if you miss that, it's not so important. So I want to welcome you to our March Simon Talk. As people know, these talks are really about our opportunity to engage with people from whom I suppose, colleagues who we borrow from liberally when we're developing our own understanding of the housing crisis and solutions to housing and solutions to the homelessness crisis. At some level, that's filtered through our own understanding of housing and homelessness and of being on the front line or working with those on the front line of the homelessness crisis. But there's also, I think, a real value in allowing people a platform to come and inform beyond the Simon community, particularly for stakeholders who engage with us. And that's really what the Simon Talks are about. So this month, we have with us Sean Mahon, who's the current president of the RIAI, the Architectural Society in Ireland. We are in a collaboration with RIAI for more than, I think this is the 20th year with the Simon Open Door. And I suppose this is in part because of that, but actually also because of the enormous contribution that the RIAI make to our understanding of what will work when it comes to planning. And that's what Sean really is going to talk to us about today. To briefly introduce him, Sean is president of the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, and he's going to be here to discuss innovative and alternative housing solutions that could be adapted to help tackle homelessness in Ireland. Sean is a founding director and current managing director of Mahon Architects. He's a registered architect with over 30 years' experience in design, planning, and development of healthcare facilities. Sean has served on various boards and committees within the architectural and healthcare sector in Ireland, including as a former president of the Architecture Association of Ireland. One other thing of note is that Sean is a member of the HSE working group, which was responsible for recommending the introduction of 100% single rooms in all new acute hospitals in Ireland. We were talking briefly about that just before we went live. And I suppose it resonates with us because we feel that that level of protection for people and respect for people's privacy is really important, obviously in the healthcare, but also in terms of the provision of homeless services. When we have that period of when people are having that experience, that crisis of homelessness, it's so important that they have their own space, their own door. And I think that really resonates. And it's possibly in part to do with that, but Sean is also part of the broader Simon family, as he was involved in the Dublin Simon Ushers Island project, which, if anyone who knows Dublin will see, a very beautiful building is appearing on the quays in Dublin, and it's also internally going to be a rather spectacular and important addition to homeless and addiction services in Ireland. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Sean. And thanks again, Sean.
Thank you very much, Wayne, and good morning, everybody. As Wayne said, I'm just going to talk to you this morning maybe about some of the background and context to the RIAI, but in terms of our policy initiatives, but also looking at some of the possible solutions for housing and development that we are promoting at the moment in the context of this talk, which is about innovative housing solutions. So just to give you some context on the RIAI, it was founded in 1839, so it's been around for a long time. It's the home of architects, or for architects and architecture in Ireland, and we have over 4,000 members. There's most of them whom are registered architects, but we have graduate architects and architectural technologists and retired members as well. All of whom are working in the public sector and the private sector and voluntary sectors and in many sectors around the country. I think that our mission, the work we do, is really guided by our strategy, and at the heart of this is our mission, which is based on three ambitions. One is to promote architecture that delivers sustainable, creative and resilient solutions for society and our environment. That's quite important. And we also support our members in the practice of architecture, and then we also protect standards through registration and continuing professional development. So these provide the key areas that really just allow us to focus on our vision, which is inspiring excellence in architecture to deliver a sustainable and resilient future. One of our strategic objectives is to communicate knowledge that we have within the profession to policymakers and society, really, in the form of some advice and research. And in that context, I suppose some of the key, more recent documents that we have been publishing and being involved in is are particularly in the area around housing, is the housing policy and delivery. We have low-rise, medium-density housing model, which has been developed over the course of the last 18 months, which I'll speak to you about a bit later. We're also looking at standards for designing homes for aging population and designing for manufacturing and assembly, which is in the context of how do we deliver a speedy response to the crisis that's facing us in housing and other areas at the moment. We're looking at guidance around old houses and new homes and how we can reuse and adapt older buildings into their residential use. And we have been looking more carefully, I suppose, at some strategies for how we work in towns across the country, really, in terms of transforming, I suppose, housing and public space and cultural areas within towns to give them new vitality and new life going forward. So that's some of the background policy areas. The challenges, of course, that we face are well known to many people. I mean, we know that there's a huge lack of housing, which really has a big impact on all aspects of our society and infrastructure. But obviously, and as Simon know very well, it really impacts those most marginalised in society. And so, I suppose within the housing challenges and the housing kind of promotion of housing solutions, one of the key things we're trying to look at is ensuring that we have the right type of homes located in the right place. And that really means it must be aligned to proper demographic projections, and that housing really is something that cannot really be seen as a commodity. We need to incentivize the type and location of housing that we require to support the society that we want. In other words, that we need to ensure that our housing models are following the models that are required to serve society, rather than just being set out on their own without any recourse or any reference to what the greater society needs are. So the current issues and barriers to innovation, I mean, there are many of them there at the moment, but I think there are a few that we might want to just highlight. The first one is that there are regulatory constraints and I suppose there is a lack of adoption of innovative models in housing because of those regulatory constraints and lack of flexibility in the development plan generally. I suppose what many of you don't know really is that our historic planning principles on which many of our housing policies are based up until recently were based on something that was set out in the early 1900s in 1918, which was the Tudor-Walters report. And that really perpetuates a sort of a lower density model for that can lead to things like suburban sprawl, more reliance on the car, and a poor sense of place and identity. But it doesn't really produce the model for housing and for placemaking and for I suppose expansion of our towns and cities to meet the demographic and population needs to which we all aspire. And I suppose it is worth noting that this is becoming much more widely understood, and the more recent Department of Housing guidelines and policy documents in this area really start to reflect some of these issues much more carefully. I suppose the issues now that we have to look at is how do we implement these new policies that we have in place. So the current formula, as I said, looks at residential areas that can really only achieve, or find it very difficult to achieve, housing solutions that are more than 30 units per hectare, and that really results in low density enclaves of housing and high density enclaves of apartments, which is slightly different to the integrated cohesive model of neighbourhoods and communities that we need. So there is a lack of flexibility and interpretation in the development plan guidelines, which does impede that. And I suppose the housing supply targets on top of that are quite low in terms of their their needs to meet the growing demands and population demands looking into the future. And I'll maybe talk about that later on in terms of looking at future planning and future population growth so that we are putting in the infrastructure that's required to meet those now rather than reacting at a later date. So I think maybe what I was hoping to talk about this morning were perhaps some of the solutions to what we are talking about here within the RIAI. And I want to talk about 6 in particular. There are many different solutions that are out there, but maybe 6 that are more readily achievable. I think that might result in some progress and some delivery of higher and innovative, higher quality housing solutions. The first one is a relatively straightforward one. Is that there are unnecessary blockages in the planning, procurement systems in particular, and I suppose many of you would be aware of that in terms of the time sometimes it takes to get planning permission, the actual plan and the difficulty in reactive planning rather than progressive planning, the difficulty in procurement processes that seem to take an extraordinary amount of time to deliver. And I suppose that really impacts on the delivery of housing at the quality and speed that we need to deliver it to. So it's a well understood blockage, but I think it's something that really has to be tackled to ensure that there is a more smooth and efficient process through delivery of planning and procurement processes to enable the delivery of housing at the speed and quality that we need it. Another solution that we are promoting is to move to a 3D planning system, and by that I mean that really we're looking to a model of a plan preparation and a plan preparation for our cities and towns that moves away from simply 2D mapping and 2D plans, which are very I suppose they're very difficult for the members of the public to understand in terms of setting out a vision for what a future of our towns and cities might be. And in fact, at a time when we're all working in 3D, the delivery of 3D models and processes and so on is relatively straightforward. There are many countries and many cities across Europe who are now looking at and have been for some time developing a 3D planning model system whereby members of the public can go in and see a 3D model either in physical model form or in visual form of what the plan for their city is in the future. And that idea of increasing engagement and getting better understanding by communities and society of what the future of your city will be and what the future of development in your particular area might be, it really, I think, in the first instance, will enable local communities to visualize and engage with how housing and development can be integrated into the community. But it will also reduce much more uncertainty and risk and cost in the planning process, because if you understand and you can see a 3D visual model of how our cities are going to be developed in the future, and you comply with that, that should enable a much more streamlined and efficient process for planning approval to be granted. And in areas where you do not then comply with that 3D planning model, of course, that may go through a much more rigorous assessment. But we are certainly convinced that the development of 3D planning and model systems will enable much better engagement and much more efficient planning, and I suppose much more certainty in terms of what is allowable and what is planned for in the future, which will make better use of the resources that are required to deliver the planning systems. The third solution where we talk about is linked into that is really creating a plan-led system, and by that I mean that the system for development is actually planned in advance at a larger scale. There are some examples of this around the city. I mean, the Docklands examples in Dublin, which have been ongoing now for the last 15 or 20 years, have delivered a fairly cohesive plan for the entire element of Docklands from Custom House all the way down to the point on both sides of the river. And whereas there are things that can be learned from that in planning in the future, there is no doubt that a cohesive plan that's set out at the outset for how parts of our city will be developed and delivered will over time lead to a better outcome and a more, I suppose, more certainty in terms of the delivery of that outcome. And not only that, it can be planned in advance in terms of not only the individual buildings and projects, but in the infrastructure that is required to support that, whether it be a public transport infrastructure or places of cultural places that are incorporated within that plan, or indeed there's public facilities such as schools and health clinics and so on that are needed to support these areas. And that plan-led approach, I think, is extremely important in terms of ensuring that all of the models that are required to develop a quality local area and a quality plan for a city is delivered in a much more coherent manner. The fourth solution we are constantly proposing and talking about is investment in long-term planning of sustainable infrastructure for our cities. So we know that our towns and our cities are growing fairly rapidly. There's been extraordinary growth in population over the course of the last 20 or 30 years. It is, by all accounts, if one reads the projected statistics, that population growth is going to continue for the foreseeable future. We think that there should be plans put in place to look at a 50-year projection forward for our towns and our cities, which actually begin to build on developing and delivering the resilient infrastructure that's required to support that. Now, what I mean by that is, like, say, the public transport infrastructure, your energy infrastructure, even your water supply. We have a problem in Dublin at the moment in terms of the likely water supply to our city to serve the population growth that's going to be there. These things take a lot of time to deliver. And not only that, we need to provide new towns and neighbourhoods to serve that population growth and provide new parks and wetlands for sustainable development. All of these issues and all of these elements of infrastructure take some time to deliver. And we have to invest in long-term planning of that infrastructure now to achieve what will be living cities and cities that can support housing and support people's needs in the future. It is extraordinary, I think, by some accounts. I was looking at this recently in terms of projections for the growth in population, and either at a lower level or at a higher level of growth. The population projections for the island of Ireland up to 2070 are going to be between 10 and 11 million people, which is an extraordinary growth over a period of time after a relative lull for the first 50 years after the foundation of the state. And that population growth is going to be much more concentrated on our cities, and principally our capital city, actually, because we do need to develop our regional cities much more. But the strain that's going to put on our major cities, in particular our capital city, will be extraordinary if there is not long-term planning of the infrastructure that's required to support that. So that's something we really want to continue to promote and ensure that some I suppose planning is put in place for that over time. The fifth solution is something that we were looking at in terms of delivery of new housing methodologies. So one of the things we have been promoting is this, in response to our housing kind of crisis, has been the low-rise medium density housing model, which is a typology that exists in a lot of European countries such as Sweden and Denmark and Finland, and it's achieving very high quality dwellings and high quality, well integrated, sustainable neighborhoods that we're aspiring to. But it does so in a way that actually gives you a much greater density of developments per hectare, which can range between 35 and 80 dwellings per hectare, which is quite a substantial increase from the 30 dwellings per hectare that I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation. So there are a number of ways in which this can be achieved, and it's very interesting to consider that this can be achieved with low-rise developments. And very frequently, people assume that dense developments, and it's a natural assumption to assume that dense developments require high-rise buildings. But actually, this low-rise medium density solution that the RIAI has been proposing has the ability to achieve quite amazing results if applied, across large areas in the city in terms of increasing the density, I suppose, of housing at a relatively kind of a low rise across our city. So, what are the criteria that are required to achieve that? Well, they're probably just, we think, a few minor adjustments that are required to actually enable that type of solution to be delivered. So I won't go through them all in detail, but they range from, the local authorities taking in charge roads and the DMOR's policy to be adhered to. A minimum private open space per house and per dwelling is called for. The provision of car parking spaces to be brought down to 1 space per dwelling, plus 1 every 5 dwellings. So that's a very reasonable projection for parking in the city, but it would be lower than what's sometimes provided currently. Our separation distances between houses would be reduced to 14 meters. Rather than the current 22, and this is a well kind of versed model that has been delivered in many other countries and is working very, very well to ensure a slightly more dense development of the low-rise model. All of the buildings would be universal, adaptable, providing for future adaptability for universal design, good quality open spaces, excellent daylight and sunlight into the houses, and energy efficient utilities to minimize embodied and operational carbon. They are fairly normal, and I suppose you would think probably fairly natural criteria, but the delivery of that will have a huge, not just physical benefits, but we think social benefits, economic benefits, and a much more sustainable use of existing infrastructure and land at, as I say, densities and heights that are relatively normal and current within our city as a whole. So I won't go through all of the elements of that this low-rise, medium-density housing solution will deliver, but it is we think very sustainable, and it will actually promote a lot of responses that people will, I think, people will be very very pleased with in terms of smaller schemes that we will have reduced cost and risk, that will grow confidence in funding models, which will have an immediate positive impact, we think, in the housing models. But all of this can be easily integrated into existing neighbourhoods and provides for greater diversity in the housing models and greater choice in terms of its delivery. So there is a lot of precedent for this across as I said, many regions in Europe. And next door in the UK, there's some excellent examples that have been developed in the last few years. And this here is an example from Cambridge, which is developed by Cambridge City Council by Mole Architects, which, as you see, this very low-rise, medium-density model, but the whole emphasis on public space and the whole emphasis on integration of community needs and requirements into this model, I think delivers very fine and sustainable places going forward in its future. And finally, I suppose the final issue maybe I just wanted to mention was a promotion of architectural design competitions. So running in parallel with the Department of Housing, and the Department of Housing has been a great support in this in providing town centre living competitions. And by doing that, we had 4 local authorities recently that developed plans for architectural design competitions to identify and promote innovative design solutions for housing within their town centres, not only to encourage town centre living, but also to improve the placemaking and improve the public environment within each of those towns. So that's had a huge response from the architectural community, and indeed the Department of Housing has been promoting this over the course of the last year, and those projects are now proceeding through planning and design stage, and hopefully will be under construction next year. There are a range of sites that are made available for that, and that the interesting thing, I suppose, from our point of view, is that the response from the architectural community to these is to provide very, very innovative solutions for how some of our towns can be designed to develop housing models that sit really comfortably within the existing fabric of the towns. There are four solutions, and the winners of all of those in Castleblaney and Sligo and Kildare and Roscrea, they're all, as I say, under construction or under development at the moment. But these type of models we think are really very good, because they I suppose it involves working with the Department of Housing and the local authorities and local communities to look at each individual area and to find how can we provide innovative solutions that will encourage town centre living and town centre development of publicly funded housing in these areas in a manner that sits really well with the existing fabric of the towns. So they are really, I suppose, some of the solutions that we're talking about. It's been I've tried to keep it very, very high level in terms of the policy issues and some of the solutions that we're talking about. But it is, as you imagine, and as many of you will all know, it's a huge priority for government and for people and for all of us involved, I suppose, within the building profession and then within the whole policy area around construction, to try and find solutions for innovative housing. And thank you, Wayne, for the opportunity to present here this morning. I did finish one, but with the last slide there was our Simon Open Door that Wayne was talking about. It's in its 20th year at the moment. It's running from the 8th to the 15th of April. So we will hopefully have I think a huge number of architects, I think up to 1,000 slots, I think, provided by architects for free to enable funding for Simon in the future. So thank you very much for that, Wayne.
And thank you, Sean. It's always good to get the plug in at the end. If we have any architects with us today, do sign up. We need all the slots we can get. Yeah. But to carry on the conversation, so as people know, we're going to go to a sort of a Q&A part of the event now. If people want to ask a question, you put it into the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of your panel down there. If it's disappeared, if you just move your mouse down, or you can put it into the chat function. And I'll put the questions to Sean as we go. Also, if you're tweeting about the event, do use the hashtag SimonTalks. So I think there was, firstly, thanks very much for that, Sean. I mean, you did keep it quite high level, but there's a tremendous amount of content there as well. And I think it speaks to the work that the RIAI are doing in trying to support in finding solutions. I suppose one of the things that jumped out at me was when we talk about the medium density, which is something that other people who work in the housing area have raised in these talks before. And I think clearly there's broad agreement that really is the way forward. And you've outlined some of the ways forward. But I think what was really striking, one of your things, it was the sort of the immediacy of the benefit of it. In terms of, given that we're in the midst of a housing crisis, and there's all this talk of there's no silver bullet, which is true. There's always talk about we have to work our way out of it. We need to look at 10 and 15 and 20 years way out of it. But the immediacy of moving to that way of building in terms of getting us on the road to getting ahead of this crisis, I think was really striking. And I just wonder if you'd expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when they're in order to solve the housing crisis, there are a whole multifaceted type of solutions that are required. But without doubt, this low-rise medium density model has the capacity to deliver quite a substantial element of that solution. And the reason, I suppose, is that it can be very easily integrated and knitted into the existing fabric and structure of our towns and our cities. You're not talking about either, developing a huge greenfield site that's way out of town and has its own issues in terms of providing infrastructure and rail and transport and all that sort of stuff to serve it. But you're talking about trying to find areas that are currently vacant within our towns and cities, of which there are quite a substantial number. And I think there are many ways in which these models can be stitched into that existing fabric. And that's why I suppose it has the potential to really make a big difference, because some of one of the other aspects of the housing solution is to ensure that we don't have urban sprawl and that we don't end up, as we're genuinely concerned with is that you end up in a city in 2070 that Dublin stretches to Kinnegad. That is, and it's a real concern in terms of ensuring that our future plan is for a sustainable, compact city that people can live in and work in, but in a way that actually responds to our current model of our city. That doesn't frighten people or scare people, but actually resolves, some of the issues we have in terms of new neighborhoods and new communities, but within that type of existing fabric that we are used to in Ireland.
Yeah, I think that really resonates, and also links back to something else. So one of the earlier solutions you talked about, 3D planning, which in the initial, I suppose, positing of it, it sounds like a technical architectural thing about why you have nice models, but actually it has a real resonance and I suppose importance in getting buy-in to these, exactly that, dealing with that nervousness and perhaps people's concerns that raise objections around planning and maybe slow down the whole process. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I remember when I was the very first job that I did when I left college was actually in Stockholm, and I was amazed at that time when I was brought down to the planning authority in Stockholm, and they went down into the basement, and the basement in Stockholm had an entire model of the entire city in 3D that all of the public, all of the society had access to and could see their city in 3D form. And it really struck me as being extraordinarily beneficial for all members of society to begin to understand what our city is about, and then we can plan in a way that's much more understood and much more responsive, I suppose, to people's needs, I suppose, and community needs too.
Yeah, I think that really is striking, because we know, particularly when you talk about things like new social housing developments, which obviously is a big part of the solution to the housing crisis, because you need to insert affordability. And I think some people's objections to that is often around, they worry about the quality of the housing that's going to be put in, because there's a sense that social housing is low quality housing, which isn't true, in fact, and historically hasn't been true either, but there's been a perception of that.
Very true.
And I do think that's the thing. So we have our first question, which I think, so does the new planning, or do you have anything to say on the new planning and development bill, which is currently making its way through the Oireachtas?
Yeah, so we're currently reviewing that at the moment. I mean, I don't. It's a very, very substantial document. There's about 700 or 800 pages in that document, and I think we are at the RIAI. I mean, are reviewing that document at the moment to see what our response to it is. But I mean, in terms of we'll be looking at that through the lens of some of the issues that we've just been talking about, and to see how will that new planning bill enable these type of solutions that we've just been talking about, and if we think it needs to be amended or tweaked to achieve that, we'll be certainly commenting on that.
Okay, great. Another question is, you mentioned energy, water, and transportation as infrastructure underpinning sustainable and resilient communities. Do you think there is ideological and political merit in naming housing too as core infrastructure?
Oh, I think that is. I was talking about a slightly separate thing in terms of the infrastructure that's required to support housing, but I think housing and other. I mean, personally, I think. And I think a lot of people would support that, and the need and the requirement, and I suppose the need for everybody to have access to housing, healthcare, and education is something I think there's broad agreement in society that is kind of a something we want all our children to have, and all members of society to have. And I suppose it's, when I was talking about the infrastructure side of things, it was really to enable the delivery of and support the delivery of all of these issues, because you can't have any housing without water supply, or without energy infrastructure, or without the public transport that's needed to support it. But beyond that, I suppose that I would agree that there's a real need to ensure that we provide those basic needs for society in our plans.
I mean, that's something we in the Simon communities have. We find, if you want to support somebody who's had that experience of homelessness, what you can't do, as to be facetious about it. Like you can't go, oh well, there's plenty of room over there. Can we just build houses and think? Because that's removing people from their community, which underlines undermines their capacity to actually be part of a vibrant community. And the same is true in the broader society, I think. It is part of that infrastructure. If we don't have affordable housing, we don't have anybody who can work in the city. It becomes a hollowed out.
Well, I think it's a real danger, isn't it? I mean, it's really to do with cohesion in our society, I think, and that your city needs to have provision for people who work, provision for cultural spaces, provision for businesses, provision for all those things that go together with our public housing and social and affordable housing and so on, to make and deliver a cohesive society that really reflects us as a society. And I suppose it's when you marginalize that, it begins to create problems, I think.
Yeah. So I suppose to build on that, just to bring us back a little bit to some of the solutions. I mean, one of the things you mentioned, which is something that Simon communities have campaigned a lot on, is the issue of vacancy and dereliction. And I know another area that we've been talking about has been, or that has been part of the conversation, has been the sort of tailing off of office development, and in more office space becoming available as kind of we're maybe in a position of oversupply. And how are those things? How should we be thinking about those into the future?
Yeah, well, actually, I was at the National Housing Conference there last week before last in Waterford, which is a conference between the RIAI and the Department of Housing, and there's some very interesting kind of I suppose thoughts and innovative solutions that are aired and articulated at that. But one of them was a really good presentation that was given by an architect called John Dobbin from who's in Dublin, who was looking at all of the older office buildings in our city, and actually coming to the conclusion that the older the office building, the more suitable it is for housing, in a strange way, because your floor-to-floor heights are more akin to housing. Your actual infrastructure within it is more suitable to housing, and that there's probably an opportunity there, as not within the new office blocks, which are much larger structures and have huge floor-to-floor heights, but within those older office buildings, which are actually the buildings that are more likely to be derelict and be vacant, to adapt those for use for housing. So I think that's a really interesting model that needs to be looked at a lot more closely.
And just, I suppose, as we think about those steps forward, are there any of the sort of infrastructural issues related to building itself that you're seeing that perhaps the fall off in terms of retraining and that we can build our capacity to build more homes, or does the medium density help to deal with some of those as well? So I'm talking particularly about the shortage of skills.
Oh, yeah.
For developers, for builders.
Yeah.
And does medium density help to address some of that? Or is the opportunity in the fact that we're building less offices and people can perhaps be retrained? Or is it a combination?
Yeah, I think that's a good question in terms of the infrastructure and skills that are available, or I suppose the training and skills that are available. There are, there's a lot of work happening in that area at the moment, but we do need to bring more and more people into both into the construction side with the skills necessary to develop and build our buildings. But it's interesting you should say that, in terms of a lot of that's going to be much more focused on adapting and reusing existing buildings, and it's going to be more focused on the lower rise, medium density. It's going to be focused on kind of traditional skills in terms of the type of skills that might be needed for building houses. But on top of that, you will definitely have a much greater move to design for manufacturing, assembly, and modern methods of construction, and people need to be trained up in that as well. So there's a lot of work happening in that area in trying to ensure that we have the skill sets both at design level and at construction level to respond to that, and ensure that we as within the construction sector as a whole have to get more and more efficient in how we deliver how we deliver our infrastructure. So that is a huge challenge, I think. And it's one we just have to continue to try and ensure that we have more and more training for all people to at design level and construction level to achieve that.
And I suppose as we think about those, I suppose modern methods of construction is something, it's obviously a really innovative and important way to go. And I think there's an awful lot to be learned. It's also, I suppose, becoming a buzzword, which is always concerning.
Yeah.
But in terms of where you're seeing it, I mean, around the rest of Europe, it's just building homes.
Yeah.
But where should we be looking? Where do you think is the sharp end of this that maybe we can learn the most as you look around? Or is there innovation in Ireland happening that we're not currently, I suppose, alive enough to in terms of development of?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of thought being given around the world, and including Ireland, for as to how this should develop in the future. I don't think we're necessarily behind, very much behind what's happening internationally, but there are, I think people have different views about how this should be applied, and I suppose that's one of the questions that we have to address, is that the reason we use modern methods of construction are to achieve this, greater speeds in delivery, but also to improve quality. It's not about achieving speed at low cost and poor quality. It's actually trying to ensure that we are improving the quality of the environment and of our buildings for people, as well as making sure they're delivered more efficiently. And I think one of the challenges we have at the moment is to try and create that space to ensure that these tools actually are focused on improving quality rather than just on reducing cost, if you know what I mean. So that's a debate and discussion that's happening across internationally, across the world. And in fact, it still requires time at early design stages, to ensure that you're going to get the right outcome. And we need to invest a lot of time in that, ensuring that these then MMCs and design for manufacturing and assembly we have that space to, as I say, to make sure that it's delivering what people need rather than just low cost solution.
Okay. And so I suppose that brings us back sort of cyclically back to one of the first things you mentioned, which is the future planning and the role that has to play in as we develop our cities, which brings us back to the 3D. So there is, in terms of your 6 solutions, there's actually almost don't want to say a circular nature to it, but it is part of an entirety of the package, which I think speaks to the simplicity of dealing with housing, which is just build houses and provide the homes, but also the complexity of it and the sort of the need for a total system approach to responding to housing.
I think that's absolutely correct, Ryan. I mean, it's housing itself can be complicated enough in terms of the building model and how to integrate all of the various elements of buildings, whether they're 2-story, 3-story buildings, and your access to that. But the bigger package is really about what is the space around the houses, what is the public environment around it, how do you provide access to for people to play and to enjoy living in that area, and also then how do you support that with the infrastructure that I was talking about. So it's really more about the neighborhood than the actual house, and we really need to ensure that when we're designing the actual house and designing the housing model, we're actually designing the neighborhood, which is a slightly bigger thing, but it's the only way we can. By doing that, it's the only way we can actually achieve the totality of what we need in response to what, creating spaces and places that people will be happy to live in and to raise their families in for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the plans around housing over the last 20 years I've been at this have talked about that. It's not just building homes, it's building communities.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we've done that particularly well. I think there are pockets of it, but I don't think overall we've done it very well. Just in terms of reflecting on, I suppose, a career in architecture and a career looking at this and how we do it well, what do you think has it been sort of, as the academics in the sociological field might be concerned about, is the over financialization of housing and becoming too commodified? Or are there other barriers that you think have held us back in developing those communities?
I think if you were to ask me what is the most important thing in ensuring successful outcomes, it is collaboration. It's not that any piece can be developed in isolation on its own. So if you have take the housing model, if you have a housing model that is just designed as a piece of housing without any reference to some of the other pieces that need to be, you need to collaborate with, whether it is the planning of the neighborhood, whether it is the integration of our transport and road systems, where it is the integration of landscape and gardening systems, which is the integration of sustainable models for how energy is provided into these houses and dwellings. All of that collaboration is extremely important, and it is, I think, when people collaborate and bring all that knowledge together, that you are much more likely to get the broader kind of outcome that you need, that addresses maybe the wider community needs rather than just the individual kind of house needs.
I think that's that speaks to, again, that kind of complete package that you've presented. So I'll ask people if they have any fun. I've had a great time here, but it's been really. But I'm just wondering if anybody else has any last questions into the Q&A or the chat. And but we usually do try and keep what we give the whole hour. We usually do try and keep this to 45, conscious that people have given up a part of their Monday morning to listen to us. So Sean, with that, I think I will say thank you very much for your contribution. I think it's been, I've really enjoyed the chat, and for anyone who wants to share it, you'll get a copy of the video. If Sean is open to it, we'll also share his slides.
Yeah, of course.
And as people know, we put these up on YouTube as well. So please do share it with colleagues and friends. I think it's been a really informative conversation, and speaks to the contribution that Sean has made in 30 years, but also that the RIAI continues to make. And from a Simon perspective, we're particularly grateful for that. So with that, we'll sign off. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you.